And the reason for that is primarily because of the training and BTU with the body camera initiative, and also backgrounds because of the hiring process. So that accounts for the majority of the training, or I'm sorry, the majority of the increase. There are several enhancements in this area, and Chief Arto will be beginning with the cadet class, the new recruit class, which is made up of CSOs, and there'll be more conversation about the CSOs themselves at that point.
Thank you.
So we do have an enhancement certainly for a recruit class. We have 33 recruits in the academy right now who are scheduled to graduate on December 16th. And I just interviewed that. One of the changes we've made in the process is every person that is hired by the Minneapolis Police Department will have an interview with the chief. So I just interviewed all 38 candidates. Once they get to the place of select or select with reservation, that's when I want to have face-to-face conversations with them. And so they were very informative. They were a very talented group of CSOs, and there were 38, and there was 32 of those that I felt would make excellent Minneapolis police officers in the future. So we had originally planned to do 20 to 25, but we picked 32. Mm-hmm. I hate to see them go somewhere else. And when attrition happens and it's unexpected, it's nice to be able to have somewhat of a cushion. So I feel like that's going to help us with that.
Thank you. Council President Johnson had a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Chief. I thank you for the information yesterday about where we're at in hiring. And I need to clarify for myself, when you have made offers to people to be a CSO, is that the beginning of their employment with the city, and then they go through the 2 years of law enforcement training? Or is it that they've been in CSO and now they're being offered a position as an officer? I'm just not clear about that.
Could you begin with the definition of the acronym?
Mr. Chair, President Johnson, yes, this is very confusing for us all, actually. So CSO is Community Service Officer. Those that I interviewed, why it's challenging is it depends on where they are in the program. Some potential CSOs, those who apply to be a Minneapolis Community Service Officer, may already be going to law enforcement school. Some of them are close to being done, but they're not post-eligible, so they can't be in the recruit class. Some haven't even started. They just thought, hey, I'd like to be a police officer, and they're at the very infancy stages. So we have a plethora of ranges. Those that have 2 years to go, and those who could be done in 3 to 6 months or a very short period of time. So as we need people, we move them over from the CSO to the recruit class as soon as they're eligible, if we happen to be having a recruit class. The benefit for us in creating this pipeline is I see us needing less and less looking to recruits. We will be utilizing CSOs, moving them over to the recruit portion, because we will be training and developing our own people. We will be training and developing the next generation of Minneapolis police officers. We will have experienced them for several months to 2 years to see exactly how they work. This, I believe, is the best route to go.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I have to say I went to the graduation the other night, and it was very interesting because it was a cadet class. A lot of people had, previous jobs, and one of them was a 911 operator, and I hoped it wasn't one of our 911 operators. No, good. Yeah. But it was really interesting, all the different careers, including a chaplain, someone who was a chaplain, so Baptist chaplain. So very, very good. And actually, I informed my constituents about the graduation and those numbers that you gave me yesterday, Chief, and people are so pleased to see more people on the street, our police officers on the street. Thank you.
Yeah, especially officers who have been trained through our own internal systems. These are Minneapolis cops. Yes. I'm delighted to see that kind of operation. It really helps our diversity goals.
Thank you. And I just want to highlight some of the challenges when we do hire. Sometimes people still don't make it through the program. So we might start out with one number and that changes. And frankly, we have a staff of people that are really doing a thorough job in our backgrounds. It costs the city an enormous amount, not only just financially, but in public trust if we hire the wrong people. And so we need to make sure we're doing that. And Sometimes that takes a little bit longer, but now that we've been doing this for a while and we've established that pipeline, it's going to help us to be able to pull over and remain more fluid. So if we have 5 more in attrition than we expected, or something's happening in the city where we need to have a larger class, we're going to have the ability to grab onto those CSOs that will be at the ready and move them over into our recruit class.
Councilmember Palmisano had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Harteau, just a question. I've always understood from former Assistant Chief Clark that we cannot hire police officers who are non-citizens or who are not yet citizens. And from the aspect of recruitment and diversification and to be trusted and rooted in the community, can CSOs perhaps have some kind of other kind of citizenship status? Do we accept people into a CSO position who may not be a full-fledged U.S. citizen but might have many qualifications that would make them really good at being a CSO?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, no, we do not. Because these are officers that will have to be post-eligible, and so that they need to meet the qualifications to eventually become a police officer. That doesn't mean we can't have a conversation about a role or position of, we don't hire CSOs to stay CSOs, I guess is my point. That doesn't mean it's not a conversation we have. I will tell you that we are getting the diversity, however. The CSO class that I interviewed, 74% diverse. There were East Africans in that class. There were Hispanics in that. There was just a large group of diversity, 74%. I don't remember, the females were about the same.
Thank you. Is it possible that is CPS, as being a crime prevention specialist, perhaps an eligible position for somebody with that status?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Palmisano, yes.
Thank you.
Good. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This kind of fits in with the discussion that has been happening, but I wanted to note how much I appreciate the efforts to diversify the force in a lot of these ways. In the 10th ward and then in the community just to the south, in Councilmember Glidden's ward, we've had a couple of homicides recently that have really caused a lot of fear and stress within our Somali community. And Inspector Loining and his team have done an incredible job of working with the community and leveraging the resources that we do have, but there aren't enough resources within our department today and even our city enterprise to really fully engage the community there. So could you just talk more about kind of the direction that we're going and what you see us building toward over the next, 5 years or so, or whatever time frame makes sense?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, that's a conversation that I continue to have and want to have with all of you, that we need to really look at what people want police officers doing. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and I'll use that homicide as an example. Officers that are assigned to the scene are very much focused on the scene. That's what they have to do. But then there's neighbors and people who come to the scene and somebody needs to talk to them. We've utilized our community chaplains. We've utilized my chief's advisory council that come to the scene, but I'd like to have others. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean those are police officers that do those things. Maybe we have another position. Maybe that's how we utilize CSOs. Maybe we have a position like that is in uniform, but it doesn't necessarily have arrest authority, but they can do other things. We look at response times. Maybe this is also a position that could handle report calls and follow-up that doesn't have arrest powers. So it is part of a larger conversation about where to go. I do rely heavily on what the community and what this council and mayor want from their police department and their police officer. I do feel we're moving in the right direction. I hope you do. I hear it every day from people who have had good experiences. That's the other balance with response times. For years, response times to calls were how we gauge success, but I think we need to evaluate that. I have asked all the officers to not be in a hurry, especially on those priority 2 calls. If it's a priority 1 and it's in progress, you're going to want to get there as quick as you can. You're going to want to capture a suspect. You're going to want to aid somebody if they need medical attention. Whatever it is, it's an in-progress crisis call, but those priority 2 calls could be a burglary call. It could be something where we make a report, but we want to do more than a report. And we've made tremendous strides in decreasing burglaries in the city because officers are initial investigators now. They take the time to go to neighbors and say, did you see anything? Did you hear anything? That takes time. And I don't want, if you're the only time you've ever called 911, your response is, hey, I got to go. Here's your blue card. And you have no time. That is going to diminish the relationship, the public trust, and the value people see in their police department. Because that one burglary call or that one low-level crime may be the most important thing in your world. And if that's your only experience with a police officer, that's detrimental. So we haven't quite figured out the rub yet of where we're at, and so we're constantly looking at that. Because I don't want this to be a drive-through service. This is not, officers still feel like, I got to keep going, I got to go to the next call, I got to go to the next call, because they're so concerned about response times. And although that's important, I think what's more important is the quality of service.
Great. Not seeing any further questions, so your next.
Okay. The next enhancement is for the early intervention system. There's been, and then a substation. A lot of conversation about the early intervention system. That would certainly help us. We had one, it wasn't very effective. OJP, the Office of Justice Programs, came in and asked us to really look at creating a new and more effective one. We actually just had an OJP-sponsored trip to Seattle with many of our department members. Councilmember Yang was even there, thank you. Community members, Federation, to really look at an effective early intervention system. This is about tracking officer performance and really enhancing training opportunities, specific needs for those officers, making sure we capture things when they're smaller. And then the second one is for the implementation of a substation to enhance our programming in the Somali community, as mentioned by Councilmember Bender as well, really to address those livability issues.
Thank you.
The next enhancement is for 2 forensic scientists in order to meet the needs of the city investigators in our court system. In the last few years, technology and our internal expertise has increased dramatically. This has resulted in our ability to increase successful latent fingerprint development and the identification that meet legal standards that we really need for prosecution today. With the advent of all this technology, if we don't get it, attorneys will expect it, and we won't get the best prosecution and charges in those cases. Additionally, increases in the swabbing cartridge casings and processing of handguns with our NIBIN program. And I know you're going to ask me what NIBIN is. And I'm
Thank you. I was about to.
National. Thank you. National Information. National. Ballistics Information. No, but the second I. Ballistics Information Network. That's
what it's about.
National Index of Ballistic Information.
I'm glad your officers know that.
You know, if you've only known the week I've had. This is the problem with acronyms. Even we know the acronyms better than the definition. But it's about the ballistics in the system, and we can track guns quicker and connect them to cases, that much I know, and we can connect them to people quicker as well. But the additional testing takes time. So us being able to hire those forensics officers will allow crime lab, I shouldn't say officers, forensic personnel, allows the crime lab to be in the field, freeing up officer time and improving evidence turnaround and allowing for faster prosecution. So that benefits both patrol and investigations. Okay. One example, the latents are up 37% increase over last year and a 55% increase over 2013. And the comparisons made, we have an 11% increase over last year and a 36% increase over 2013. So it's an incredibly valuable tool.
Yes.
It makes no sense to have enforcement if we're not going to have prosecution and convictions.
So this enhancement is 2 additional people?
Correct.
Any estimate on what the increase of those percentage increases would be with the addition of 2 additional people?
With the total number?
Mm-hmm.
DC Lampy, do you know the total number off the top of your head?
No, I don't.
I do
Okay.
not. I would say it's pretty significant because it's not like we have a lot to begin with.
Okay.
So I would say it's a significant double-digit increase.
Certainly worth the investment.
Yes, absolutely. And then, oh, there you go. Okay, now we have mine. Thank you. Fast as you can, sorry. Yes.
That covers the enhancements for administration and training, but I would like to spend just a little bit of time on some of the graphs in this area. I think of special note is graph 18 or slide 18, which talks about really at the end of the year, we're projecting to be at 850 sworn officers. And we're very excited about this. As you know, last year with the change in the retirement and pension plan, we had a significant increase in attrition. This year, our attrition has been higher than expected, but even with those two, we're definitely on track to getting back to our 860 that we've been after for a year now. So, as you can see on the next slide, on slide 19, if you remember from last year, even the number of people who are eligible for retirement has decreased because of the great number of people who have retired over the last 2 years. So we feel these are much healthier numbers that we can deal with on an ongoing, normal, typical basis going forward. Again, I'd just like to point out in the next slide that our expenditures, as you can see, the majority of our expenditures are in payroll and fringes. That's consistent over the last 3+ years. And the diversity, you might be interested in looking at the hiring trend, which indeed shows that the diversity at the CSO level is pretty significant, and then cadet second. My favorite slide, I guess near and dear to my heart, is slide number 21. As you can tell through the enhancements for this year, there are a significant number of civilian FTEs adds. And the reason that I think this is so important, I think a couple of things to remember. Back in the early 2000s, there was a significant decrease in civilian FTEs within the police department. Part of the problem with that is that we're asking officers to do things that really might be better done by civilian staff because of training and education. And as you can see on the first slide, the cost for civilian FTE is significantly less than the cost for sworn. So from just a resource allocation, obviously going to this route is important, but it's just as important to get the officers on the street for the jobs that they've been educated and trained to do. So this is an effort to rebuild that infrastructure, get that support. If you look at our peer group, we're definitely down. In fact, if we were to be at the same level of civilian staffing as our peer group, we would need to have 240 civilian staff. I'm not suggesting an increase of 100, but I think that we need to have a little bit more balance than we've had in the past. The next area is...
I'm sorry, Ms.
Sure.
McPherson. Councilmember Yang had a comment. Question.
Ms. McPherson, with regards to sworn versus civilian, I mean, can you just kind of give me a ballpark figure as to where you all are at this point?
Sure. Right now excuse me, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Yang. Right now we're pretty much at 140 civilians compared to, well, let's use the 850 number for the end of the year. So
Okay.
It's about 14%.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, I just want to point out, I mean, I was just out in Seattle recently with DC Glampy and a few other folks. And, you know, I mean, not to give the exact stats with regards to Seattle, but I mean, Seattle's numbers were pretty startling. I mean, in terms of number of civilians, I think, I mean, their police force is close to about 900 and sworn. But I mean, in terms of civilian, I mean, they have almost 1,000, I think. And so it's a very different way of doing business out there.
Good.
Okay. On to the next area is the violent crimes investigation. Violent crimes investigation includes the homicide and assault units, robbery, some of the task force teams, the FBI Safe Streets team, DEA Street Drugs Task Force, so a variety of task force. This has remained relatively consistent, with the exception of we now have a group that is reviewing homicide cold cases that work in partnership with the FBI. The next unit that we have, or program that we have, is criminal intelligence and analysis. This combines real-time intelligence with data mining and looking at trends and links to try to aid in the deployment of the department resources and maximize effectiveness. And I will tell you, over the last 2 years, just looking at it as a civilian, I am continually impressed with the coordination efforts that are allowed with having this group and providing this type of information, especially internally. Some of the things that have changed within this group over the year is we have the new gang team, which began in May of 2015. The crime analysts, which are coordinating Northside hotspots, and have a community collaborative grant, the Burn Grant, and where it's a cross-functional team, which allows us to get out of our silos, so often prevalent in government. This is to address the actual reasons for crime, and I do think it's the wave of the future. One of the things that we've also enhanced in this area is our camera technology, where we're in partnership with private cameras downtown, so that if there is an event or a large-scale issue, we can connect those cameras and view their cameras immediately. That's a huge positive in cases of emergency. We continue our Emergency Awareness Program, or CAP, to community groups and businesses, which is a terrorist prevention course. And it teaches attendees how to recognize the 8 signs of terrorism. This group, or this program, has won awards nationally. And Chief Artaud is going to be speaking about our last enhancement, which is the increase in crime analysts.
Thank you. So this really piggybacks on the conversation we've had about the need for civilian staff and that support staff. I mentioned at the last budget address that we would evaluate our civilian staff needs, and so part of that is coming into these enhancements. We realize we can't have them all, so we prioritize them. The forensic scientists were 2 of those, and then 2 more additional crime analysts. We know that they're key in helping us gather intelligence and be able to see, frankly, crime trends and patterns that the human eye can't see, and make those predictions and connections. They're instrumental in working with the community, our federal and other law enforcement partners as well. They supply information for grants, which is critical, and other community and city programs. In addition, there's a growing desire, of course, for people to have data. And so we need folks that can help us get data. Many of you need information for your constituents as well. So with this desire to have that public data, we need to have more assistance to help us analyze that more frequently. So the results of increased staffing will allow us to have faster response times for information requests and analytical information. And additional support to the precincts in the community will also allowing us to meet the grant requirements for those grants.
Thank you. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief, I just have to mention that I took the opportunity to tour the crime lab during their week, which it was really interesting. And one of the things, the mayor had already put her budget out, so I could say that she'd, beefed up the crime analysts and support staff. So that was a good message. But your NIMBN program, the gentleman that operates that pointed out that they have a big backlog there of about 6 months of anything that is a priority gets moved forward, obviously, but there are enough shots fired and cartridges recovered and all that sort of thing that it just takes X amount of time to process it, and there's a backlog. So I think these were these additional staff will be well used. Thank you.
I appreciate that comment as well. Unfortunately, we all watch TV shows, so we see CSI.
Mm-hmm.
You should be able to handle this in 45 minutes.
Yes, I would love that. Yes.
Including trial and conviction. So.
Yes.
Good.
Thank you. Any other questions on that?
Not seeing it.
Okay. We're doing the.
We have two more areas of programs. The next one is the Special Crimes Investigation. This is the juvenile outreach, domestic assault, juvenile sex trafficking, absent and missing children, licensing. This group has been extremely successful over the last year and a half, specifically regarding the domestic assault work that they've done, some work with the Domestic Abuse Project. So again, the units themselves have remained fairly consistent within this group, but they have been doing some phenomenal work over the past 12 to 18 months. And the last unit is the community engagement group. This group is responsible for the crime prevention specialists. These are the ones who have the actual real close community contact. We're very proud of this group. They've actually, most of them have been around for a while. They have great ties to the community, great rapport with the community, and we see them getting more and more involved in community training, which I think is a wonderful thing. This has remained relatively consistent as far as FTE. One of the things that we have allowed this year, which has been different, is to have them be eligible for some overtime so that they can manage to attend some of the community meetings that are at different times. Before, they were somewhat limited on some of those that they could make. So, any questions about the programs before I get into the CARS requests?
We do. We have a question from Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. McPherson, I see in the Special Crimes Investigation section that there's a slight increase for next year, but it's pretty nominal. Because of the success and the demonstrated success of the wraparound services in the hotspots areas, is there any plan to expand this program next year? Are you still collecting data in the pilot that you were doing, or what would it take to be able to expand this program? How would you see that? This is maybe more a question for the chief. Yeah.
That's what we're doing. Mr. Chair and Councilmember Policy, I'm sorry, I was trying to really understand your question. There's so much in this. I think we do want to really look at the data a little bit more, but we are making a concerted effort more on domestic assault cases and how we have an investigator that is assigned now with an advocate that can go out and respond to those normal calls that are gone on arrival, where we usually don't do any type of investigation in those because they become uncooperative. We're doing playing more of an advocacy role, frankly, in that, and we haven't quite seen the benefits of that, but I do see that an area in where we might want to grow.
So I guess Mr. Chair, my question then for the chief is how would you see, how would you look to expand something like this? Because it is in such few areas right now, and particularly that investigator with the advocate combination relationship in the pilot has given us great results in these areas. If to expand this program, are there thoughts on how that would be done? I'm just curious from the framework of how much of an investment would it take from a dollar perspective to be able to expand the great work going on here?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Policy, I don't know that would take a significant increase in resources as far as a number, a financial number. It's more of a realigning our resources, putting more investigators in those positions to cover more areas of the city.
Okay, thank you.
And then I guess I would just add, we'd also need that advocacy support. And so I don't know what the appetite is for that on that end, but I think that's a conversation we certainly could have.
Thank you.
Not seeing any further questions, so next section is fine.
Mr. Chair, council members, in the last area, I'd like to present our operating capital requests items that are on basically the second to the last slide. We are asking for $1.58 million that was recommended in the mayor's budget, and this includes the $600,000 of matching funds that are required for the body camera grant. So that's embedded in that information. So are there any questions on any of these?
I'm just looking through the list really quickly.
Sure. The majority of them are replacements.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, there's huge benefits, obviously, to technology. One of the negatives is obviously that technology changes, and also it needs to be replaced and maintained. So the majority of this is in that ballpark.
Good. Not seeing any question on the CARS request. Not seeing any? Thank you.
And that is the other. I'll leave it to.
Okay. That concludes our formal presentation. If you have questions.
Thank you very much, Chief. I think we've kind of addressed the questions during the process, so thank you for your willingness to interrupt the presentation to respond to those issues. Not seeing any further questions.
Can I just add a final comment?
You can have the last word.
Yeah, I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of the work of this department, and thank you for your support in our efforts. I realize it's not a secret, crime is up in the city, but I would say that with the efforts that have gone on with our relationships in the community and with all of you, that we don't know how high it could be. We could be like other cities in this country that are seeing double-digit increases. We have 5% increases in violent crime, which I don't like. But we have made so much progress in so many areas, and I have a small portion of the team behind me that deserve incredible thanks, but I have 1,000 total that deserves that as well, and I hope you're as proud of them as I am. Thank you.
I'm speaking on behalf of the council. We are indeed. Thank you very much for the presentation. And we'll be able to conclude today's presentation, or this morning's. I think we have, let's see, 2 presentations later this afternoon. We'll be talking about emergency management department and the budget presentation from the fire department. So thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.